All right, we're kind of in an unorthodox scenario in terms of recording because I recorded an actual video for this topic and the camera quality came out not very great and the lighting was really poor, and then the recordings messed up of the benchmarks. And there's just a list of things that went on. It actually had nothing to do with the computer itself, which is good, but the topic of the day is computer upgrades, GPU. Okay, so the question that I had asked me, that better? I don't know. Anyway, I'll leave it alone. The question that I had asked to me, as soon as the 9060 XT came out, this was earlier this week, the question I got the whole time, do I just buy this? Do I look at last generation? Do I buy a new GPU? And that's a very complex question because it's a very complex answer. There's multiple ways to go about that. One of the things that I would suggest that if you have something, honestly, if you still have something in the 20 series, 2060 Ti, 2060, yeah, Super, like 10 gig or whatever it is, it's still a pretty decent card because games haven't gotten too crazy. The things that have increased the most in games is going to be ray tracing, path tracing, and things like that. You have a couple different options to look at before jumping into those. I'm still using a 2070 Super, and I will show you in games that I feel like players are still playing -1. Well, I don't think that video even did well in terms of its recording, so you may not see it. But I was playing this version of Modern Warfare Remastered, which is what they would call MW3 on HWM or HMW, whatever. Yeah, HMW. Anyway, regardless, that was just something just to show that even with games like that, poor optimization does not fix anything. So, with that being said, the biggest thing is looking at optimization, looking at the games you play. The games that we're going to be testing here should be Star Wars Battlefront 2. Reason that we're testing that game is because it's extremely popular right now. We're having a great time playing it again. It's fantastic. And it is a game that most people are going to be playing, but here soon, modding. And that's going to make a huge difference. And that's going to be another topic for another video. But that makes the game relevant. We'll try Marvel Rivals, Halo Infinite, even though that game's kind of hit or miss. Splitgate 2. I play the finals literally strictly for benchmarking. I don't play that game outside of this. The finals is, to me, not very fun, but I know there are lots of people who play it. And what was the other game that we tried as well? I'm trying to think. Well, regardless, you'll see it here. Fortnite's one of the biggest ones. And I believe, did we toss it in there? I don't think we did. We didn't toss Call of Duty in there. And the only reason is I genuinely dislike Call of Duty. I don't even want the game on my computer. I don't want to take the extra time in terms of the new Warzone to even install it on my computer. But I can promise you, it plays dramatically better than it may have been in the original benchmark when we built this computer with all the parts that we got off Facebook Marketplace. And all we did was upgrade our motherboard and our processor to something that supports DirectX 12 and then something that is a little newer. So we were using the 1700X before by AMD. It's a great chip, 8 cores, 16 threads. I think it was clocked at like 3.8. It's probably 3.5 gigahertz, and turbo's up to like 3.8. It didn't turbo up very high. That first generation, all the way up to the 3000 series of AMD cards, these are just good. Those are good chips. They get the job done. And then we jumped over to something like the B550. So we're using a B550 Asus TUF motherboard now, and we're using a Ryzen 9 5900X. And now we have a 12-core, 24-thread of a card of a chip and a chipset that is very good. Very good to the point where I know people are still using 5600Gs and 5700Gs in builds currently to do budget builds. It is a phenomenal deal. We ended up getting the board and the CPU and the RAM and the cooler, which I didn't use the cooler or the RAM. We got the whole board kit for $250 with a 12 core, and it did fantastic. You'll see some of the benchmarks. Something that I'll go over. Every game beforehand was all played at the same settings. On average, got around, let's say 70 to 80 frames. So do have to pay attention to one thing with this theory, okay? You are not just going to inherently get an increase in FPS if the game is GPU bound. What does that mean? You'll see in some of these games 99% GPU utilization versus some games where I'll have maybe 60% and 30. Hopefully, we try to get to that beautiful 50-50, but you have certain games, and this is something to pay attention to so you can understand how to go about this yourself as you are looking at upgrading. You have games that are going to be CPU intensive, GPU intensive, CPU bound, GPU bound. And you usually don't get games that are too balanced 50-50 between the two. So just because you see that you have 99% GPU utilization does not inherently mean you have a bottleneck. I hear that a lot. I see that a lot. It does not inherently mean you have a bottleneck. There are just some games that just strictly run off of the graphics card. It runs everything there. The CPU doesn't have to do any work. It doesn't matter what you're going to do. You're not going to get that CPU to do much work because things are pre-rendered and not having to process and load things in. But games like Fortnite, Warzone, Apex Legends, PUBG, all these games that are battle royale that everything changes every single time you upload or you jump in into the game, those are going to have a lot more CPU utilization, be very important as soon as you land to be able to make the difference on any of the forefronts of loading and getting all that information out quick. Another decently CPU bound game is going to be Minecraft. You're going to see a lot more utilization on Minecraft for your CPU than you are going to be your GPU. That one's probably going to be closer to that 50-50, maybe even 60-60, depending on what you're doing. But in terms of load management, you don't have to look directly there. Everyone does, but just keep that in mind. So if you're going to be playing games that are more GPU intensive or GPU focused, then yes, I would immediately say look at upgrading. I wouldn't even inherently say try to get a 50-60 or 50-70 or even a 40-60 or 40-70, but I would say look used, see what you can find. I am not the biggest fan of just the new GPU market. I'm not going to recommend you half the time to just go with the new GPU. If you're doing your first time build, I would say budget for it and budget $400 to $500. That's going to be a budget GPU. I don't love saying that. There's people that are like, oh, the 9060 is supposed to be $299 and the 5060 is supposed to be lower than that, and they're right. It's supposed to be, and you're not going to get them at that price. They're going to be extremely inflated in price because of what people can find versus getting reference cards, and there's a list of things that we can also put into a video. But currently, I'm telling you, you're going to save a bit of money if you already have a card by upgrading to something like even a 20. I watched someone do the 5060 Ti. That's a 10 gig card. I believe it's a 10 gig card. It might be a 12 gig card. I can't remember. You'll see it on the screen. You'll know. Versus the 2080 Ti. Honestly, the 2080 still did just fine. It kept up, if not won in certain cases. But when you got into things like increased ray tracing, path tracing, and upscaling in certain scenarios, oh my goodness, that 5060 destroys it because it's made for it. But you have to realize one thing. Modern graphics cards are not going to be built for increased performance. I want you to keep in mind that during the Steam survey, we still found out very comfortably that 1080p is still the standard, and that's not because players want it to be. I cannot stress that enough. They make it. All the reviews and commentary I've heard on this is that they're like, well, gamers still play at 1080p. No, gamers still play at 1080p because that's all we can afford. I can't stress that enough. I don't want to go out and buy a 5080. I don't feel like dropping that kind of money just to get an increase in resolution. I'm already playing these games at 1080p, and most of these games at over 100 plus frames. Some of these games include tossing on some DLSS and some upscaling, but genuinely at this point, I just don't think it's worth it, personally. Even if you're building a new computer, I don't think it's worth it. I would say look at seeing if you can get a 3090. Yes, these older cards definitely use a lot more power than newer cards. They're a lot more efficient, but I came from the generation of the 690, and so everything is super power efficient to me. Like my 2070 Super was running and definitely pulling like 113 I want to say when we got really into it, probably around 200 watts, but I mean, I don't know if any of you guys remember the 690. Really sick card, dual GPU. but it like pulled on average 300 plus watts just because that's what it did, and it was extremely hot, and things have gotten better, and I'm not going to sit there and make it seem like they haven't, and like we're not going to sit there and make it seem like $500 has to be budget. You have other options, you have something that you can get as long as we look at optimizing correctly and just utilizing the right technology at the right time. You can get something for pretty cheap. I got the 2070 Super for 180 bucks. So that's all I had. I mean, I didn't want to jump into it too hard. You'll see some B-roll of the computer as we were building it. That footage came out great, but it's just poor lighting. Everywhere we are, poor lighting. So we're going to look into finding a way to have a better controlled environment than what I have currently. And we'll go from there. Sorry, I'm really stuffy. I'm really tired. And I have a big trip I have to go on Monday, Tuesday, and then I'll get back, and then I have to leave again on Friday for another trip. So just super busy. Anyway, I wanted to get some content out for you guys, and I was trying all weekend to get this video to look better, and it's just not going to happen. It's just poor. It was just poor lighting, and it was really bad just video for the recordings. You may even see recordings maybe just recorded gameplay like I've done in other videos, just because I just couldn't get the screen cap to keep up with the frame rates and the smoothness that we were getting. It was not being conveyed in the video, and it was really obnoxious to watch. But I think if we use the pixel here, we could probably get it to look pretty good. Anyway, that's just my opinion. I need everyone to understand that. It's not the definitive answer. Like I said, it's a very complex answer. There's multiple things you can do. What I would do right away to see if I see any good improvement, which we did on average, which I've done this math already. On average, we saw an increase to 20 to 30 frames on FPS, or I'm sorry, on GPU FPS usage games. And we saw over double our frame rate in games that were CPU utilized. Fortnite, Apex, Marvel Rivals is actually decently CPU intensive. That might be the Unreal Engine. I have no idea why it is, but yeah. But if on the minimum side, I saw an increase of 20 to 30 frames. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, which is not crazy, but here's the big thing that was very impressive. My minimums, my 1% to 5%, extremely low. Frame time stayed dramatically better. We got disgustingly less micro stutter. Part of that is using things like DirectX 12 on DirectX 12 compatible devices altogether, but another side of that is using a bigger, stronger, faster CPU. The 5900X, I believe, stock speed should be about 3.7 gigahertz and can turbo all the way up to 4.7, which is massive. And for the most part, it's going to live in that 4.7 range. I will state, when I bought this board, if you're going to buy something used, I totally think that's a great option. Just pay attention, default your BIOS, update your BIOS, default them immediately. Somebody was running a pretty aggressive overclock on this one, and it was shutting down constantly. I could not figure it out because it was overvolting. The system would just reboot. It wouldn't give me any error. It wouldn't tell me anything, but luckily I was able to run a synthetic OCCT overclock, or well, benchmark, and then see that these threads were failing. Luckily, it wasn't saying the CPU cores were failing, just threads. And then I realized, then we're overvolting it. Somebody was overclocked and just didn't do a great job at managing that overclock. So I think they boosted it to stock, trying to be like over 4, and so it tried to turbo up to 5. And this cooler is good. It's just not that good to run anything at 5 gigahertz. That's going to get hot quick. But I will say, and I'll even put the benchmark up there, as we've been running things, I don't think the CPU got over 75 degrees Celsius, which is fantastic. I love that. That's maximum what I'm going to be seeing. No game we played got anywhere close to that. I think the closest we saw was maybe 68 degrees Celsius, and that was on games like Fortnite. As soon as you load in, by the time we got midway through the game, those CPU temps drop back down. And I have this actually in this computer in a cabinet, and that's why I have it in there, is because for the most part, all of these components are good enough to keep themselves cool, and it could draw out enough air from the back of this, but it really is just it's just water cooled, and I'm going to let the water cooler do most of its job and then exhaust all that hot air out the back. So, you know, it's one of those situations that we didn't see much of a huge difference having it on the desk versus having it in the box, which is good. That's good. You know, sometimes you choke off air, but with most of this modern stuff, it's pretty good. You know, it come from the 7970, which is a sick card, but Love it. Let's talk about a blow dryer. Anyway, thank you guys. Go ahead, sub. I'm gonna have more stuff coming out. We're gonna be working with some of my buddies, and we're gonna see if we can make some more content for you guys. If you have questions, discuss them in the comment section below. Feel free to drop them. If I don't reply, it's because I'm not signed into my account. For some reason, I'm not getting notifications because I have my golf channel as well, and so it just depends. So I will reply to you at some point. I will see it. But yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. We'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.